Welcome, friends, to another Wolff Responds. Now that Mr. Biden has left the stage to Kamala Harris, I want to talk about the challenges Kamala Harris faces, because they are challenges that neither Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden ever questioned, let alone faced, let alone solved. It's as if there were an enormous elephant in the room and nobody was able to say, gee, what are we going to do about the elephant in the room? Because they were all pretending that there wasn't an elephant in the room, even though it's obvious there was. It's also obvious what the four great economic problems are that are facing the United States. They were not understood or admitted by Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden. Will they be by Kamala Harris? We will see. But I want to push what those basic problems are, what the challenges are that they represent, and that might be a standard by which to measure whether Kamala Harris is any better than Joe Biden. And I hope she will be, because Mr. Biden on these issues was a colossal failure, as was Mr. Trump, both of them. Here we go. Here are the four big ones. Number one, we live in a changed world economy. For most of the last 70 years, the United States was the top dog, the richest economy, the biggest powerful military, the political punch that goes with it, and the cultural influence as well. Nobody else was a serious competitor. That's been true, as I say, 75 years, maybe a century. That's no longer true. The American empire of the last century is over. And that very reality is not being understood, let alone dealt with. What we do have in Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden is a lame, ineffective campaign to limit the growth of the other big economic power that is now in the world, China and its allies in what are known as the BRICS nations. Together, those nations, China and her allies, are a bigger, richer economic bloc than the United States and its allies, the so-called G7. That is a historic change. What is the United States going to do? Mr. Trump bloviated about trade wars and tariff wars that were going to change that situation. He didn't see it as a fundamental historic shift. He thought a few little slaps on the wrist of the Chinese leadership would change everything. Wow, was he wrong. China continued throughout Mr. Trump's regime to outgrow the United States. It's continued to do that under Mr. Biden, despite Mr. Biden holding on to Trump's tariffs and trade war policies. You're not dealing with a changed reality. You think you're the top dog again, and you're slapping away what you think to be minor irritations. They're not. You're failing to understand what the whole rest of the world understands, that the United States is now not the top dog. That's why the war in Ukraine isn't being won by Ukraine. It never had a chance. Russia dominates because you can't stop Russia because it's part of the BRICS allied with China. You want to use nuclear weapons, then we're all gone. You can't use nuclear weapons, and without them, the dominance of the United States isn't there anymore. This is the reality. Will Kamala Harris have some plan to deal with it? That's the question. This year, according to the International Monetary Fund, the economy of the United States will grow 2.6%. The economy of China will grow 5%. That's double the rate. continuing the relative growth of China much more than that of the United States. In other words, the elephant in the room, the changed world situation, isn't about to go away. And for the time being, all we can do is wait and see whether Kamala Harris has anything new to offer, because the approach of Trump and Biden has changed nothing. The United States has fallen further behind the BRICS and China throughout the regimes of both of those men. Next issue: the inequality here in the United States, the gap between the rich and the poor, whether measured as wealth or measured as income or both, continues to worsen. We've been doing that for 30 to 40 years. Leaders in both parties have said this is not good for a democratic society. Setting aside whether calling us a democratic society or not is reasonable, what's clear is that neither Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden undertook to do anything about the growing inequality, which is why it grew during Mr. Trump's regime and it grew during Mr. Biden's. If it continues under a Kamala Harris regime, we question, as all Americans should, when will it reach the boiling point? The gap between rich and poor is already fueling huge divisions, disruptive divisions in America. Nothing is being done to deal with that problem. And Mr. Biden didn't do anything to slow it, let alone reverse it either. Third, the climate crisis. We see corporations left and right, led recently by JP Morgan Chase, pulling back on the meager commitments they made to do something about the climate crisis. So once again, this elephant in the room sits there with our record temperatures, our droughts, our forest fires proceeding, because we don't have a government that puts any kind of priority, that understands, let alone solves the problem. And finally, the craziness of our capitalist system's instability, the endless fluctuation between a boom and a bust, a recession, a depression, an inflation. The economy is so unstable that, as I used to say to my students, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. But here we go again, speculating on when the next downturn comes. That's what the Wall Street Journal and other financial press are talking about now. Yeah, we haven't solved the instability. We just live with the ups and downs. And the question is, did Trump do something about this? Of course not. Did Biden? No. Will Kamala Harris? Who knows? But right away, the first and fundamental question is this. It's a challenge, if you like, to Kamala Harris. Are you going to admit these four enormous problems, this elephant in the room of a government policy? Or are you going to talk only about other issues, carefully avoiding anything that looks, smells, talks, or walks like a criticism of capitalism? Will you too be too afraid to say things like that, and therefore keep on doing not enough to stop the deterioration that is at the foundation of what is troubling this country? An economic system that has moved on to other parts of the world. That's where capitalism is dynamic, in Brazil and India and China. Not here. Just like it moved from New England to the Midwest, to the far West, to the South, capitalism moves and leaves its destructive residue where it has abandoned the people. It's abandoning the U.S., and will we have leaders who understand that, face it, and come up with the necessary solutions? That's the real challenge that ought to be confronting Kamala Harris right now in a very intense way. If interventions like this strike you as useful, please share them with your friends, your relatives, others who might be interested. That's why we produce them. And of course, if you can contribute some financial support, that helps pay the cost of doing these as well. Thank you.